Welcome all in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. It has been a couple of weeks, but we're getting back into it. A lot to obviously get to. There's been a lot of big news. So we're going to be recording this one back to back with a couple other episodes. So we'll get into all of it. But we're going, and in this episode, we'll go over Oregon State. We'll preview them. We'll preview Pepperdine as we start to see what the Waves are going to look like in year 2 of Ed Schilling. We'll get to the last 2 of the non-conference schedules that were released, which were St. Mary's and Seattle. But I want to start off with the big news about Santa Clara's late addition to the roster, a G-League addition to the roster. And Thomas, this was a shocker, one out of left field, a new one for the NCAA, and I think I'm glad we hadn't done Santa Clara's preview yet based on this news.
Yeah, lots of new things in it. I think one of the themes that we can fall back on is the more we think we know about NCAA eligibility, the less we know in actuality. So I had heard about this probably about a day or two before it was officially announced. It was a very weird circumstance, to be quite honest, because you take a step back, you say, this guy has legitimate professional experience in the NBA G League, obviously given it was with the G-League Ignite program, so maybe a specific subset of professional experience compared to others, but everything else that points to it, when you take it at face value, you got a guy who's, so to speak, dropping down a level in competition and now going to play for Santa Clara, and a very intriguing player at that, someone who you really want to see how his explosiveness can help translate, someone who he's got some experience alongside some other guys. Obviously, I mentioned the Ignite stuff, but also alongside a former Bronco, Jared Brownridge. So you think all of that just kind of compiling together and all that. So what the ultimate conclusion is, honestly, I don't really know, but all I know is that we've reached probably the millionth fork in the road in terms of NCAA eligibility. I'm trying to see how he kind of fits into this Santa Clara, what I would think would be a provisional starting lineup, because I don't see you'd sign this guy just to bench him, at least off the rip. But we'll have to wait and see on that account. But I am very intrigued by this addition.
Now we're talking about Thierry Darlan coming over from the G League, signed to play with Santa Clara for this year. He's going to be counted as a junior, 21 years old, out of Central African Republic, 6'8" wing, 7'3" wingspan. He can play really kind of like the 2, 3, or 4. He's going to have a lot of versatility in that way. I mentioned he was playing in the G League just this past year for both the Delaware Bluecoats and Rip City Remix. Averaged over 10 points a game, 45% from the field. It is wildly new territory to see someone who has played professional basketball in the States now playing in college, obviously, because we've seen plenty of international players play professionally overseas in their home countries before they've made their way over here. But this is the first time we've seen it happen where someone has played professionally here and then they go on to play college. Saw in the presser that he references the experience that both Jalen Williams and Brandon Pajemski have had to develop their games and come out as NBA players. Obviously, we know you mentioned Jared Brownridge, and there's been another of other Santa Clara guys who've gotten opportunities in recent note on NBA rosters. Keyshawn Justice as another example. Like this is Santa Clara is producing more and more NBA talent, and this is the first time where it's like, well, they're not producing the NBA talent. They're just kind of refining what the NBA talent here. And thinking about he and Elijah Mahi being next to each other on the wings, to me, that immediately they become a matchup nightmare.
There's lots of good things to like, and I think lots of interesting puzzle pieces when you take a step back and look at Santa Clara, especially like their first wave of people in the rotation. You have the guys returning like Elijah Mahi. You got some utility guys who will probably expect to do more in Brett Napper, Jake Ensminger. And then you have the kind of like the box of chocolate guys, which I would classify Garrick Normand from his transfer, Chris Tajo. You think Big Ten guys coming in. Then you obviously, in this case, having Thierry Darlan, G-League experience coming in. To what extent can these guys kind of rehash the magic? Because You kind of referenced the professionals coming into the ranks. Brandon Pajimski, that's the name I think of. So what do we think is going to happen?
And also this also comes off the heels of the fact that Jalen Williams came back and to Santa Clara with his Larry O'Brien trophy in tow. We got to see the clips of that and really kind of see like how Santa Clara re-embraced Jalen Williams, and he's been no stranger, obviously, to the program. He's continually come back since his departure from the Broncos. Whenever the NBA is on, whenever he's on the road trip to the Bay Area, we've seen him be there plenty of times. And I mean, you're starting to see the Santa Clara program. Again, I think it's the reference of program. You see this building and building and building. Of course, we talked like next step. We've talked about it off and on about they have to get to the tournament. They have to make that next step too, because it's one thing to talk about what they've done in talent development, which I don't think you can deny what they've been able to do there. But it's what are they doing in the year to year at Santa Clara in the NCAA tournament in college basketball. We haven't quite seen that. And maybe this is a move that gets them a little bit closer because we know the schedule's there. Like we talked a bit about the schedule, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. And maybe it'll take some time for them to figure out what that's going to look like. But Santa Clara, at the very least, this is going to make for a very entertaining November and December as they try to figure things out with their new piece.
And to go back to the Jalen Williams reference, there's no better, so to speak, walking advertisement for your program right there. You deliver a guy who not only was on an NBA roster, but someone who meaningfully contributed, someone who was one of the best players during that playoff run, had his own legacy game, a 40-point game in the NBA Finals. There's no stretching what that significance is in terms of how OKC ended up winning that championship. And you, like you mentioned, coming back to campus, like there are so many guys who you can think of across any number of programs who you don't have to come back. You can say, look, I'm an alum, I'm proud, but maybe I'm going to disassociate from being there in person for the foreseeable future and then come back at the time that I deem fit. Whereas Jalen Williams comes back literally the year after when he's a rookie, and then takes obviously the road trips didn't line up as well the following year, and then this year obviously after the big time run. I mean, I don't think there's any better explanation or vision for what you're trying to accomplish, and Santa Clara knows like that. You have to relish in that. You have to market it. You have to turn it around and say, look, this is what we can be. And then the coaching staff has to in turn say, look, we still have goals that we need to accomplish with this program. It's not just going to be this of what guys have done ever since they've been departing from Santa Clara. It's got to be what can they do now? How can they get to the NCAA tournament? And in this case with Jalen Williams, a very well done event, one I was proud to have viewed from afar. Didn't get to go to that one, unfortunately, but definitely will be excited to welcome him back because he is getting his jersey retired, lest we forget. That announcement was made by the athletic director, Heather Owen. We'll be getting, I believe the official date was Wednesday, December 4th, Santa Clara facing Utah Tech. And Jalen Williams will be coming back. They play the Warriors the night before, and he will be getting his jersey retired. I will be there for that one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that one. Maybe get the second ever sit down that I've gotten with Jalen Williams after that return against BYU a few years ago.
Yeah, it'll be an exciting night down at Levy Center when he makes that return. But this is not a Santa Clara preview episode. We will get to them in a little bit. We are focusing on both the Oregon State Beavers and the Pepperdine Waves, and we'll start off with the Beavers. And this was a team that first year in the WCC last year, 10-8 in the WCC. They were 20-13 overall. They looked a much better team than they had the year before. There was a lot of overhaul. There was a lot of new pieces playing in a new league. Yes, like the competition was not as challenging from top to bottom in the WCC as it was in the old Pac-12. But we know that the top of this league was just as challenging, if not more so, than what we've seen from the top of the old Pac-12 in recent years. And this Oregon State team, again, they're kind of starting over one more time because they lost their entire starting five. They really needed to kind of retool and revamp what this roster was going to look like. They have a couple of guys who are returning that look like they're going to be good pieces from that returners. Like you think about Isaiah C., Josiah Lake. It'll be interesting to kind of see if Jaquavius Williford is going to really kind of grow into form in year two. But when you think about this Oregon State team going into Wayne Tinkle's 12th season, what are maybe some of the immediate things that are popping out to you about this squad?
I think the real thing is kind of to start with what the vision of what Wayne Tinkle wants to do and what kind of the fans have perceived over the last few years. And I think it's like it's a mixed bag. And one thing that where I think Oregon State fans kind of want to find out one way or the other what Wayne Tinkle, what Wayne Tinkle's ultimate conclusion will be. Is that going to be more NCAA tournaments, more postseason appearances with the crown and such, or is it going to be an eventual flameout? And I don't say that to say that I'm trying to see Oregon State fail, but you could think of all the noise around road games and Wayne Tinkle road games for Oregon State. Like that matters. Like you're not a serious contender in this conference if you can't win road games. You can't be losing at Portland. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that in any respect whatsoever. If you are who you say you are in Oregon State, trying to be a very serious team, they can contend. You saw them. They played Gonzaga, played well against them. St. Mary's played well against them one time. San Francisco played well against them. Santa Clara, same deal. So you can see that they can fight with these guys. But the problem is, it's just the consistency. And that's the one thing that's really going to stick out to me. How consistent can Oregon State be this season? Can they not have too many peaks and valleys? Can they find a way to not basically throw up on themselves on the road? Because it's really been too often that it's been happening into too many different teams, especially in league play last year. So can Oregon State kind of in tune, see the coaching staff stay consistent and find a way to find more meat on the bone, and then have utility guys step up, like you mentioned, Josiah Lake, Isaiah C. Those are two guys who had emerging roles last season. I kind of want to see now the brunt and expectation of responsibility is a little bit higher for them this year. And we're going to talk about some transfers who can help ease that burden. But how about that internal growth, the internal talent, and kind of the overall scouting and development? Because the better they are, the better it reflects on the coaching staff. And I think in turn will reflect better on the Beaver season for this upcoming year. But it still remains to be seen kind of how it looks. For me, the immediate characterization is a mixed bag and unknown consistency.
Yeah, also when you looked at the team last year, you had at least one guy that really you could see was making the progress, and that was Michael Ratai. Like you looked at like that, you saw a bit of it in his sophomore year before going into last season, that the growth was there, the progress was there, and obviously he turned into on the short list of contenders for WCC Player of the Year last year, one of the best in the league. Was able to be one of the top scorers, one of the best rebounders, but his departure to Baylor leaves a huge gap for this squad. And I think that's looking at this team, this is going to be a huge challenge. Now, I do think they brought in a couple of guys and there's a lot of potential here. I mean, the one that's going to immediately pop up is Des White coming over from Missouri State. This was a guy, junior guard. He was averaging 14 a game last year for the Bears. This was someone who tallied 20 or more points 7 times, 37% 3-point shooter. One of those guys who I think is going to be able to take on a little bit more of the offensive responsibility. I mean, you think about what they had last year at the point guard spot. You didn't have that consistent shooting from the perimeter, at least from the point guard spot. And this is something that Des White can bring. The other one, we got to at least talk a little bit about his brother, Guillermo. Jorge Diaz-Graham is another one of those guys coming over from Pitt. Didn't get a whole lot of playing time while there, but I know there's a lot of positivity and excitement about what his potential is. And at least like those are the couple of guys that when you start to go up and down this roster, obviously I think they're going to go right into that starting lineup. And if this Beaver team is going to get back in that mix in the middle pack of the WCC, those two are going to be right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Diaz-Graham, and I think you look at the parallels between Guillermo and now Jorge, and there's very capable perimeter players, and you look at the way that can just help alleviate the stress and trying to drive to the basket and help open up the offense. I think that's going to be a very welcome addition. I believe he shot around 47% from three last year in his limited opportunities. But you think of all that, you compile together what you hope the development of Josiah Lake and Isaiah C is. You hope that you have the right transfer and the right guy to have really drive the car, so to speak, with Des White. And then while this may be not as serious as compared to the other analysis we've given, you have first team all name this season, Yak with Oregon State. So we can't forget that. But in all reality, like you look at everything else and look at the way Wayne Tinkle is trying to build this team, there's a lot more, I guess, internal strength and character that we're gonna have to wait and see and find out. Because you mentioned Michael Ratai, I'm gonna mention Parsifala. That you just the way they worked in tandem with one another, the way they kind of like owned the driving to the basket and the post ups and all that last year for the Beavers. Very consistent, kind of how they made their bread and butter, getting to the free throw line and such. Who's going to be kind of the guy that kind of owns it and trying to get to the basket, staying aggressive and not shying away from it? Because as you can see, it kind of bled over into the rest of the team when they had DeMarco Minor and such. So how does that kind of take shape? What's the identity of this team? Because I think that's the one thing we don't necessarily know yet. What does Oregon State look like for this year under Wayne Tinkle? And I think it's going to be one of the most intriguing questions when we go see them at WCC Media Day.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, again, you look at personality and think about what this team is going to be. It does look like in the roster construction, we do see a little bit more of the adjustment from year 1 to year 2 in the WCC, because you look at when you add you mentioned Yak's transfer coming in, who's going to really help them be able to defend the paint a lot better than they did a year ago. The addition of Noah Ammenhauser is also another one, 7'10" junior center. This is someone who has going to bring a huge body into this, because we think about back to, I think about the St. Mary's game where they hosted the Gales, and they were just outsized, out-muscled, and this is clear in the way they have recruited in this off season, that is an area where they have tried to address, that they know they're going to have to beat the St. Mary's, beat the Gonzagas, beat the Santa Claras, all whom have just a lot of size, and you see that they've made the adjustment. They've figured out this is what we have to be able to do. And also you do that to USF as well. If you can body USF, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, just about if there's one thing that we can point to as maybe an issue with the USF roster, it is a lack of true size. But this Oregon State team will not lack size. They are going to be big. I think they're going to be even bigger on the perimeter than they have been in the last year or so. And I think there's going to be a lot to be said about these role players. I mean, Stephen Olawini, I'm going to get that name correct eventually.
We got a month. We got a month till media day.
Exactly. Another big body, good rebounder, coming over from Indiana State. You have, even on the perimeter, you have Kazea Akisi coming over, best friends with Isaiah C coming over from France. So there's already going to be that connection as well in the backcourt. So there's a lot of really interesting fits here for Oregon State. I like the direction they're heading. I don't necessarily know what the full potential of this squad is. And I think that's the biggest thing. I can kind of picture, based on talent, watching some of the film of where the floor is, the ceiling is almost harder to figure with this squad.
Yeah, I think it's a little more compact range of positions compared to other teams that we've previewed. And I think the one thing for me is we talk about the size. How does the size fit? It can't just be size for the sake of size, have a big body for the sake of having a big body. It has to work. You think of St. Mary's, all the trees that work, Gonzaga, all the ways that they've been very versatile. You think of everything at that point. Can Oregon State kind of find a way to make the size not only be there on paper, but make it work in practice? And I think that's the one thing we're going to see. I think for me, when I kind of pinpoint it, I can't get over the fact that Wayne Tinkle teams keep losing bad road games. I think that's one thing that's just it's a consistent detriment. And I think it's when you have that much of a sample size, it's hard to say this will be the year that they turn the corner and they drop maybe only one road game they're not supposed to. And for me, it's like, okay, they can be 6th place floor, but their ceiling to me is always going to be like 4th. That's just the way it is. When you consider Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and I think San Francisco I think those three to me are the shoe-in top 3. But maybe you disagree, but to me, that's where it feels like Oregon State's at.
Well, so, I mean, you think about like what Oregon State's path is going to be in the WCC, because we've also had the WCC schedules be released. So we now at least have an order in which we'll see these games. Maybe not necessarily some of the games still are moving targets, but we have date ranges. I mean, they're going to start with the first 2 being at home, both Santa Clara and USF. So they'll be able to get a little comfortable before they hit the road. Pacific and Washington State are the 2 teams that follow. They're not going to see St. Mary's until the middle of June. And that one is going to be in Moraga. So that is going to be a tough one. for the Beavers, and I'm continuing to scroll. They won't see Gonzaga till February, so there's a lot of opportunity for Oregon State to almost get ahead of the game in that first half of WCC play. Again, a lot. They also do play a lot of home games in that first stretch. I mean, looking at it, 1, 2, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6 before they see Gonzaga, 6 home games before they see Gonzaga. So yeah, they're going to have to still do the work on the road. That includes San Diego, Washington State, LMU, Pacific, Portland. And they got to get Portland. They have to make sure they don't lose that one, but they have the winnable road games in that first half. They have some good opponents at home that they're going to be hosting in that first half. They can get at least a bit ahead of it before having to get to February, where they'll still see Gonzaga again. They'll see St. Mary's again. This is going to be, and just the way the schedule's worked out for them, going to be interesting. Actually, I take it back. Say they see St. Mary's again. They'll only have to play Gonzaga and St. Mary's once a piece. So that's a lie. It'll actually be a little easier for the Beavers as they get into WCC play.
I think the phrase that stands out to me, and I guess this is just the way I like to evaluate teams, even root for my own teams, it's just got to show me a little something. So you have chances against Santa Clara and USF, and how hard it was to beat Oregon State at Gill last year. Obviously, they're a very good home team, and only certain teams could find a way to get over the mountaintop. They got to show me a little something. You can't be losing at Pepperdine. You just can't be losing at San Diego, at Portland. Like we mentioned, all these little different intricacies. Can you find a way to win a hard game at Washington State? Because there are barely any nights off in this conference. And I think when you look at the way Oregon State's going to be and the way they've tried to configure this roster and trying to configure the floor and ceiling of what we kind of anticipate this team to be, you just got to show me a little something, a little proof of concept. And then I can say maybe down in February, you will be that serious contender if you haven't tripped over yourself to that point.
How much pressure is there on this team to do? I don't know what do something means necessarily, but what do they have to do? What do they have to prove in the final year before the new Pac-12 kicks in?
They have to prove that they know that they can take care of business. And I think that's, again, it's a vague thing to lead with, but when we consider the things that we just talked about, when you add in this new Pac-12, obviously you have different varying. It's going to be a basketball strengthened conference, but can Oregon State find a way to not trip over themselves when they're in a good position during the marathon? They're 19 miles in, but then they tweak their hamstring or something like that. Can you find a way just to not blow it, basically? And I know we'll get to another team that's similar that has a phrase for this already, but for Washington State fans who may be listening, they have Cougan it. Like Oregon State cannot be having their version of that. They can't find a way to, like this year, they can't lose to Portland at home or on the road. I mean, that just can't happen. So for me, when I look at what Oregon State needs to be taken away from this last year in the WCC, even if they do finish 4th or 5th, can you take care of business and beat the teams you're supposed to beat? More than anything, because I think that's the one big glaring black hole that Oregon State fans are looking at when it comes to Wayne Tinkle's basketball teams and program over the course of the years. Sometimes they just don't take care of business. And that's the one thing I think they want to see before you even start getting onto the idea of, yes, they can win a conference championship. Yes, they can go to the NCAA tournament. Can you just do what you have to do when it's right in front of you?
Honestly, probably the difference between where they finished last year and being squarely on the bubble is actually probably the difference of winning those games you're supposed to win for Oregon State.
Yeah, and you look at the last thing I'll mention on this. As much as Pepperdine went on a run in the WCC tournament last year, if Oregon State handles themselves, they beat Pepperdine. I think it's as simple as that, and you can't have trip ups like that. So that's my soapbox about Oregon State's consistency. It's the one thing that I really want to look at more than anything, more than the talent, more than in-game adjustments. Can you be consistent on a day-to-day basis, game-to-game basis?
Well, that's a great segue, as we are then going to talk about said Pepperdine Waves and Ed Schilling in year 2 with this squad. Pepperdine, we're talking about a very different situation with the Waves. This was a team that was 13-22 last year. This was 4-14 in the WCC. Another team that also struggled on the road, 2-11 away from Firestone Fieldhouse. This Pepperdine team is also going to look a lot different from the team a year ago. No more Mo Odom, no more Stefan Todorovic. You have a lot of new faces on this team. And of the faces that are returning, and then of those that are coming in, I think the one thing that strikes me about the entire roster is that there's a lot of names that just we don't know a lot about their experience. Like the pedigree might look good. You have consider where some of these guys transferred from, but we don't have the proof on the court. And I think what we're obviously going to see a lot of that this year. And for me, it's really starts with the two guys who were the big transfers last year, who we didn't get to see much at all, are Javon Cooley and Aaron Clark.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. And I think you mentioned the pedigree. You look at a guy like Pavlik Stosic coming in from Gonzaga. What is he going to be? I look at another returner, Danilo Dozic, a very capable stretch forward. And the way I view Pepperdine is you're not competing for a conference championship this season. And I don't mean that in any offense whatsoever, but it's just in terms of, okay, what are we trying to build here? You look at Ed Schilling and his group as they finish up the Firestone Fieldhouse and basketball facility structures over the course of this time. What's it going to take to continue to take those next steps? And I think it requires more of a floor in terms of its talent. I think you look at this year's roster. I don't know if it would be fair to say yet that they have the talent of last year's team, at least by the end, in terms of the way it all came together, especially when you mention a guy like Mo Odom, who made the all-conference team. I do want to see how Javon Cooley kind of like implements himself. Can Dozic, with a higher burden of expectation, find a way to do something? And you just look a lot of the international flavor, a lot of Balkans on this Pepperdine team. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the comparison that there is a Southern California team with a guard that wears number 77 that's named Luca on this Pepperdine roster. Again, look at me being Mr. Conspiracy Theory after saying all first team yak, all first team name with Oregon State, but Luka Vujagovic, like how do all these guys kind of fit in? Because he comes in from a pretty premier Serbian leagues, like in Europe. Like those leagues do not mess around. I think you look at the way everything's trying to come into form for Ed Schilling and his crew. I think more than anything, you just you don't want to see the bottom fall out. And I don't want to doom and gloom any Pepperdine fans, but you definitely want to see a way where you can capture that lightning in a ball that you had from the conference tournament last year and find a way to punch above your weight. Because I think we kind of, if you classify it in boxing terms of weight classes, Pepperdine's not in the top weight class. They're not in the second weight class. Can they find a way to be in that third weight class?
I think the thing about Pepperdine that strikes me this year is, again, you mentioned the international flavor of this squad. But I think it's also maybe taking it a different way of how to build the roster, because I think right now Pepperdine kind of has to try to do something a little different, because it's going to be hard for them to be in the recruiting conversations, even with the likes of like an LMU or a Santa Clara, because the NIL just isn't at that stage. And also the pedigree of the program just is not there yet. But you look at the fact Aaron Clark coming over from Wake Forest, a lot of pedigree when you think about what he's bringing in. You look at Styles Phipps coming over from GCU. Again, another program that's actually had a couple of different guys coming over to the WCC. Aaron Maurer, the other one, going up to Seattle. You have even guys coming over from Yale. Yassine Garam, the grad guard, coming over. He only got to play in 8 games last year, but 6 points, 6 rebounds, 2.5 assists. This is someone who's going to give you a lot of solid play on the court. And I think that's what we're probably going to be looking at, is a lot of solid play from this Pepperdine team. Obviously, we are in agreement that the ceiling's not really all that high for this Pepperdine team, but there is a chance to, again, continue to build a foundation. I still think that's what Pepperdine is, that they have to try to do. It's not only building the foundation of their actual building, but also of this team and where they are headed. I think if the principles can kind of be put into place, this program starts to have a personality that matches Ed Schilling and what he's trying to accomplish. For me, this ends up being kind of like how Pepperdine wins this year, is that they who Pepperdine is. They have an identity, and I think we're starting to see that with some of these teams. I think about Pacific and way they've kind of been able to transform in year one under Dave Smart. I do feel like we're starting to see saw a little bit more of that toward the end of last season, as Pepperdine started to play a little bit better and made that run in the WCC tournament.
I like how you did mention kind of like the process, and I think maybe part of that conference tournament run last year kind of colluded like what we should kind of come to expect from Pepperdine. And when you kind of mentioned that process, you do need to learn how to win. And I think when you see how this roster has kind of been reshuffled, given all the departures and additions, Pepperdine needs to kind of relearn how to capture that magic. You think of a guy like how much can you lean on Danilo Dozic to kind of implement what it takes to kind of win a game on the road, considering they've done it at neutral sites. I think when you consider, at least from my perspective, I don't question Ed Schilling's leadership because to me, he says all the right things. To me, I think when you ask for what type of coach is going to give you some of the best locker room speeches, I think Ed Schilling would be chief among them in this league. And I think you consider how does that kind of translate to his players? How does he find a way to kind of inspire possibly guys who maybe haven't realized their potential? Does he unlock Pavle Stosic compared to maybe how he didn't get the opportunities at Gonzaga? Can he kind of internalize and kind of manipulate a way to find to make his players feel confident that they can contribute at this level, and then in addition go find ways to win games? I think you mentioned that process. I think they're starting to climb that ladder, and I think it's something where you have to kind of lean into the fact of, yes, you're going to face adversity. Yes, it's going to be painful at times, but can you go upset LMU at home in a rivalry game? Can you maybe go on the road and go beat Pacific? Can you find a way to upset maybe a Washington State at home or something like that? Can you find a way to continue to internalize who you are, build that identity, and eventually, at least for me, the biggest thing, where's the on-court leadership going to come from? Is it going to continue to be Dozic? Can Javon Cooley step in, even though after his absence last year, and kind of help be the on-court general, so to speak, for what Ed Schilling's trying to implement for this team?
I mean, and I think the schedule does help them kind of try to, again, it's figure who you are and then be able to learn how to win. You look, again, the non-conference, always kind of like have to take them with perspective because Pepperdine obviously is going to be toward the bottom of the conference. So looking at a non-con with Northern Colorado, New Orleans, Stephen F. Austin, Fresno State, Fullerton, Abilene Christian, it gives them an opportunity to build themselves up, to develop some level of personality, learn how to win some of these games before you get into WCC play, because the schedulers actually did them no favors because they have both Gonzaga and St. Mary's right off the bat in conference play. But at the very least, then it's kind of like you take your big lumps right at the beginning, and then it might get a little bit easier. Although I say that I'm staring at, okay, they host Gonzaga, host St. Mary's right before the new year, and then they go on the road for Santa Clara Pacific San Diego. So it could snowball on them just based on the way it got set up. But if you can hold your own and kind of play, at least your head up above water in those two games, build a little confidence in non-conference, it will get easier the rest of the way.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I think you learn more about yourself through what could be adverse times this to start their conference season, compared to like if you were sandbagging a team and you found ways to win, but you didn't necessarily give your best effort. So I think Pepperdine, more than anything, I think they're going to find out who they are about in regards to one another pretty quickly throughout this conference season. I think, as you mentioned, can they find a way to not make it snowball, from at least from our perspective, because we think it'll probably be more than likely an 0-3 start. Can they find a way to just make sure that it's not going to have the train fall off the tracks or anything like that? And I think Ed Schilling is the right person to make sure that that doesn't happen. But then, yes, how can you turn that around, take those next steps, and learn how to win games that maybe you do have a chance to win? And again, you don't want to dismiss teams right off the bat, but I think it's important to kind of contextualize the journey of where Pepperdine's at, and knowing that they're trying to continue to be like teams that are trying to graduate from this tier in San Diego and Pacific. Can they be another team chief among them that could graduate into that next tier of teams?
Yeah, and I think we talked about the tiering, we're talking about like just what we expect or we're predicting these teams to be going into the year. I mean, the bar, unfortunately, for this team on the low end is, well, it's last in the conference. Like, unfortunately, like this is one of those teams that just is trying to figure out a way to climb out of that bottom tier on a consistent basis. They were in that bottom tier still last year, but considering where they were the year before, it was a lot better. So this is like, again, we're talking about steps. Year 2, new head coach, new AD, kind of like new situation for the Waves, a new building on the way. Within the next 12 months, they'll be in that new facility of theirs. So this is something, there's a lot of excitement to be had for this Pepperdine program. And I mean, for me, the ceiling, for me, it's probably a little bit smaller of a ceiling. It's like, I think it's 10th. So like somewhere between 10th and 12th is probably where Pepperdine is going to wrap it up this year.
Yeah, I'm in a pretty similar boat. I think their floor is also 12th in conference, and I'll probably give them just a tick higher just because of what we've seen and how they've kind of gone on a winning streak. So you know that there's something in there to be tapped into. Obviously, Nomo Odom makes that a little bit different in terms of trying to drive that car. As I learn the language of English, surely I don't know it. For me, their ceiling is 9th. I think that's just. I don't think we're too terribly different from one another on this. I just think to me, they have a little bit more benefit of the doubt compared to teams like San Diego and Pacific. And while we've projected San Diego a little bit higher, I think, at least for me, I like proof of concept evidence. And at least Pepperdine could say that they've fought above their tier at certain times, but now they have to re-rack and do it again.
So the one thing we also did see over the last couple of weeks that happened that we didn't get a chance to talk about were the last couple of the non-conference schedules being released. One of those was Seattle U, and their non-conference. Now we obviously have a full schedule, but we'll focus on the non-con, and it was kind of like left me thinking, They do play Eastern Washington. They have Stanford on the road. UTEP is an interesting matchup. They do have Washington toward the very end. But a lot of this is, it felt very much like a whack non-conference schedule. And it did not feel like it matched the step up that that you would expect to be in the WCC. Because even when you look at the Pepperdine schedule, you look at the Portland schedule, look at some of these others, or maybe even let's take one that's maybe a little bit more similar to situation is like the LMU schedule, one, or San Diego schedule that's maybe a little bit more close to what Seattle will be this year. And I just felt like I'm wanting more out of it.
Yeah, I also want more out of it. I just don't think this is trying to find the right phrase here without trying to just go off the deep end here, but it's just not up to snuff. I just think when you consider the history of what Coach Victor has kind of put in at Seattle and kind of the consistent winning that they've had, and obviously they had a little bit of a downturn last year, they can be better than this. They can absolutely be better than this, and I think part of the problem is, and I think maybe we have to lend more credence to this type of reasoning compared to what we see here at face value, but they're kind of in that limbo part, kind of, so to speak, where Santa Clara was a few years ago, where teams don't want to schedule them for the fear of losing, while knowing that they're a capable team, but not necessarily like a resume breaking team. So like they know that they're a capable team, but the numbers don't do it justice. And if you lose, that's pretty debilitating. So I think Seattle, in a certain respect, is caught in between the crossfire between those tiers of, yes, we're down to schedule you because we think you're worth something in our metrics, versus, man, you're just on the cusp, but you're not necessarily good enough. And then you kind of get resulting in a schedule like this. But it's, yeah, no, I'm not that excited about this. I think they can do a lot better than this. And I kind of would expect them to do a lot better than this in the years going forward, because if they are who they say they are in this conference, and we think that they have a chance to be a top half team, this will not cut it. This will not cut it for when you look at metrics for postseason tournaments. If you're on the cusp for anything, they will not get the benefit of the doubt with this type of schedule. And while they may go win games this year and they may have a really good record at the end of this non-conference schedule, I don't know that we're going to learn what we need to learn about the Red Hawks to that point.
So their average opponent rank in the non-conference is 202.1. This is per Bart Torvik. That is 10th in the WCC, ahead of only Pacific and Pepperdine. Now, that said, the other schedule that came out was St. Mary's, and I have my own kind of challenges, concerns about the schedule they have. Now,
you don't want to go back to Idaho Falls? Is that correct?
Have
we hashed that enough? I don't know.
3 straight years, Idaho Falls. We'll get back to that. But the St. Mary's schedule, it's not a bad schedule. I'm not going to say that it is, because metrically, it makes a lot of sense. these are all home games: St. Thomas, Chattanooga, Ohio, North Texas, Arkansas State, UC Merced. The other two home games at the very end of non-conference: Florida Atlantic, Northern Iowa. In the middle of that, they have the battle for Atlantis. They'll start with Wichita State. Colorado State or Virginia Tech will be next. And then there's a possibility of Vandy, VCU, Western Kentucky, or the other USF out on the East Coast. Davidson away, and then back to Idaho Falls for a game there. So there's a lot of solid teams. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, they are, by opponent rank, average rank, they are second in the WCC behind only Gonzaga at 111.9. But when you dive into it more, they have four of those games are against top 100 teams. Again, according to Bartorvik. That is fifth in the WCC for the number of teams in the top 100. Oregon State has 5. Santa Clara and USF both have 7. Gonzaga has 9. And there's nothing. It's a solid schedule. If you are a college basketball person, you get it, you know it. But as a fan, as someone looking at that schedule, seeing the names on the schedule, it leaves you just feeling meh.
Yeah, I think the word I'd use, it's an unassuming schedule. It just, you look at those exhibitions with Arizona and Ole Miss, you're like, well, why can't we get that in a, even if you have to travel like USF is to Mississippi to play Mississippi State, like if you have to do that, then so be it. But you just want more name brand recognition on the schedule. And yeah, it's a little bit tougher considering how the battle for Atlantis is shaken out with the Players Era Festival and stuff, when you consider the dynamics surrounding those tournaments like the Maui Invitational and everything along those lines. So I do get that part, and that maybe didn't necessarily get the return on investment that you were looking for. However, I look at this schedule and I trust St. Mary's to take care of this schedule. That's going to be no problem. I trust them once they get into conference play. That's going to be no problem. But it's a tier above where maybe late 2010s people were saying Randy Bennett's not challenging his teams enough, and therefore we may be in trouble if we don't win enough conference games. Like the years that they win 25 games and they're like, oh, we're in trouble. Actually, this is a tier above that. They're going to make the tournament. I have no problem in saying that I think that St. Mary's will make the NCAA tournament once again. But when I look at, yes, this sticks out to me as something, yes, I need to go to this, or yes, that this is going to be their game-breaking win of the season. I don't see that anywhere. I just really don't. And yes, you mentioned solid teams. St. Thomas, very capable program. North Texas, capable program. Arkansas State, very capable program. Again, but that is if you are watching pretty much a sicko amount of basketball. Okay, that's what that requires to know.
Which maybe that's a number of you watching this. If you're watching this, you probably are one of the sickos, so you know.
Yes, and maybe that's the case. But when I look at St. Mary's, I feel like I've gotten I don't even know if I want to say I've gotten an appetizer, but I need an entree, and this is not that entree.
I think one of the other thing that concerns me about the schedule is, again, like, I understand that metrically it all makes sense that this has put them in good position in a lot of scenarios, but it also, with a young team, and I've heard the argument that this schedule matches who they are right now because you have a lot of young pieces. You don't have the true point guard. They're still trying to learn whatever else. Okay, fine. That's a good argument for the schedule. But what the schedule, I think, unfortunately creates is a smaller window of error. That if you don't get most of these games, like, I mean, even staring at them, like, do they have to be 10-3, 11-2 out of non-conference to feel okay? Or are they still going to be good if they're sitting at 9-4 coming out of the non-conference, 8-5 out of the non-conference? What's the barrier on what's going to be okay come March? And if I'm, again, thinking about the tournament committees, everything else, I'm not sure how many of these teams are going to be as solid as we think they might be. Because with mid-major teams, and we all know it better than most, that all it takes is one injury all it takes is one bad night here or there for those teams to not look nearly as good metrically as we think they might. And if you're now banking on all of them, or at least most of them, doing what you expect them to do without the brand recognition, this is a potential for disaster. Not, and I mean disaster as in I think the schedule could be the thing that leaves them off in March, if anything. And because I think the team's talented enough, they're good enough, they're more than good enough. But this is the difference between like everything goes right, 9 seed. Things go sideways, first 4.
Yeah, I like the fact that you've kind of laid out like the range of emotions that you have with this schedule, because I didn't really know that I had a good gauge of what St. Mary's fans were thinking about this schedule. I wonder if they're just kind of dismissing it. All right, whatever, it's a typical Randy Bennett non-con. We'll get to conference play. We'll be a top 2 seed in Vegas and go from there. But I do think it's important to stress that, yeah, if they do have 5 losses, I would be more than raising my eyebrow in terms of they better get this right, like in conference. And I don't want to say only through Vegas in terms of their chance to go to the NCAA tournament, but I would say, yeah, like you can't afford any slip ups in non-conference play. You can't, like, quite honestly, like even a loss at San Francisco, a loss at Santa Clara would be like, that was a chance to help us on the margins. And if we can't get that done, that could really be something where it ends up being the flip side of the border of the bubble. So something like that. So when I look at the St. Mary's schedule, I think the margin of error analysis, I think, is spot on when you look at it. It doesn't leave you much room for error, even with a young team, because people are going to fall back to what you've done for me lately and what you've done over the past few years. And that St. Mary's being in the 5-6 seed range. Can they find a way to continue to be that? I don't think that's this year's team. But when people look at that and they say, oh man, you're kind of scaring me a little bit here, that may be the reason why you get left out, because while we love St. Mary's and we know St. Mary's is a very consistent team and one of the best pound for pound programs, I think, in the country from year to year, they're not North Carolina. They may not get that benefit of the doubt come Selection Sunday. So I think when you look at this specific non-conference, I think it's an eyebrow raiser if things go wrong, like you mentioned. So I think that's where I kind of stand. It's unassuming until it could bite you in the butt.
The one last thing I will say is that all of my concerns, all of that, there is still the sense of, in Randy Bennett I trust, and
Yes,
that this is going to be fine. My concerns will not end up being much of anything, but it seems like the margin for error is smaller based on this, and it's going to be a challenge, I think, for this younger not saying that, I mean, a young team can screw up whenever, that happens, but it does put a lot of pressure, I think, on a team to say the margin for error is smaller now. You don't get to have as many off nights, and we don't want to end up in the scenario where conference play actually matters way more. I mean, they were in that situation a couple of years ago where it looked like the wheels were falling off, the sky was falling. They were 3-4, 3-5 at one point in the non-conference, and it was over. We were all ready to write them off. And then they just went on an incredible run, still ended up a 5 seed. So you know what? We've seen them do it in the past. I think that this is a team that is capable of the schedule. That's not the concern. It's the schedule leaves some to be desired.
Yeah, and I think when I talk about earlier in the episode, proof of concept, show me something. Randy Bennett has more than shown me something over the course of his time. Like if I talked about, okay, who's one of the guys or one of the teams that can find a way to get this type of schedule done and, put to rest some of those concerns that you were just voicing, it would be Randy Bennett. It would be the St. Mary's Gales. And yes, so I do share some of those concerns from an outsider's perspective that you do. But I do think I would expect this team to take care of business, but I think to not draw up your soapbox once again, it may require a win in Idaho Falls, of all places, to really feel at ease about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, and knowing that there are a lot more moving parts for this St. Mary's team compared to the last few years. I think that's going to be the one thing. That's the one thing I've been on my own soapbox about for the last few weeks. The top of this conference, I think, has more questions about these year's rosters compared to years past. I think that's really all it is. I'm not saying they won't win. or there might not be a new conference winner or anything like that. But I think there's a lot more of, okay, we haven't seen this territory in a little bit.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this one up. Thanks a lot for listening. We will be doing the next of these team previews very shortly, so check that out. That's going to be St. Mary's, and who else did I put on the list? It's Washington State. The Cougs will be doing Cougs and Gales in the next episode, so be sure to check that out. For Thomas, I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.